Welcome to the Trust Domestic Abuse training. This video aims to provide you with an introduction so that you can recognise domestic abuse and know what to do if you have a concern. You should have received the Domestic Abuse Basic Awareness Training Guide. If you haven't, please contact the safeguarding team on 0161 716 3785 or email pcn-tr.safeguarding@nhs.net. You can refer to the training guide throughout the video. When completing this training, it's important you take care of yourself, and it's really important you consider the following. Talking about domestic abuse and safeguarding can sometimes trigger feelings or trauma about past experiences, or it may be something you're coping with right now. Included in your training guide are the contact numbers for the safeguarding team, staff wellbeing services, as well as local and national helplines should you wish to talk to someone. If you are completing this at home, please consider others who are present. Are there children in your home who can hear or maybe see something in the video that isn't appropriate? Can they be sent to safely watch a film or to do an activity? Is there someone else present in your home who can hear or maybe see something in the video that might cause you to be at risk? We need you to feel safe and supported whilst completing the training and to know that help and support is available. Domestic abuse is something we should all be aware about. It's important we know how to recognise abuse not only in relation to the people who use our services, but our friends, family and colleagues, or other people in the community and general public. So the aims of our training today is to know how to recognise domestic abuse, know who is affected by it, increase awareness of why people may find it difficult to access support, know what to do if you have a concern, be aware of the risks relating to domestic abuse, think about your own beliefs, know what local and national support is available. The Domestic Abuse Act, which became law in April 2021, includes in legislation for the first time a statutory definition of domestic abuse. It defines it as the behaviour of a person towards another person being domestic abuse if they are each aged over 16 years and personally connected to each other, and the behaviour is abusive. Behaviour is abusive if it consists of any of the following: physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour, controlling or coercive behaviour, economic abuse, psychological, emotional, or other abuse. We define people who are personally connected as intimate partners, ex-partners, family members, or individuals who share parental responsibility for a child. There is no requirement for the victim and perpetrator to live in the same household. It does not matter whether the behaviour consists of a single incident or a series of incidents. Domestic abuse can affect anyone, irrespective of gender or sexual orientation. It can affect people of all age groups. At this point, we're going to watch a short film, roughly 2.5 minutes long. So I'm going to ask you to pause the presentation and, using the link in the slide, watch this video. It's called Why Did It Take So Long? It's a carer's story about missed opportunities to recognise the need to support and provide safeguarding. While you're watching it, just think about how you might respond when coming across carers or family members of patients that you might be working with. There are a number of forms of domestic abuse, each of which has devastating consequences. Often they don't exist in isolation, and it's not just limited to these forms of abuse. Over the next few slides, we're going to take a more detailed look at each of these different types of domestic abuse. Physical abuse. This could include being kicked, punched, pinched, slapped, dragged, scratched, choked, bitten, pushed, or stabbed. It could involve use or threats of use of weapons, being scolded, burnt, or poisoned, having objects thrown, violence against family members or pets, causing physical harm by denying access to medical aids or equipment, or harming a victim whilst performing care duties, This is especially relevant for disabled victims or people with additional needs. It could include force feeding, withdrawal of medication, or over-medicating. Recent research carried out by BrainKind has found that 1 in 2 people who've experienced domestic abuse may be living with brain injury. 80% of people who've experienced domestic abuse had had a serious blow to the head. 75% of people who've experienced domestic abuse had been held at least once in a way that prevented them from breathing. 46% of participants used the word strangulation to describe these experiences. What does this mean for victims in terms of care and support needs? And how might it impact on cognition? The Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 introduced the standalone offences of non-fatal strangulation and non-fatal suffocation. This is where there is an intentional act to strangle another person or does any other act that affects the person's ability to breathe and constitutes battery. If there has been any attempt to restrict breathing, then this should be considered under this category and viewed as high-risk domestic violence. There is a strong link between non-fatal strangulation and domestic homicide, and it is a known way for perpetrators of domestic abuse to control and intimidate victims. It is vitally important to understand what this is and the high level of risk that it poses, which should always prompt us to make referral to MARAC and consider other safeguarding actions alongside. Use of non-fatal strangulation increases 7-fold the risk of being killed by a perpetrator and can often cause internal injury as well as the obvious terror, since it can imply a threat to kill. Some injuries that affect blood vessels cause an increased risk of stroke, and this may not be immediately apparent. Sexual abuse. This could include sexual harassment or pressure to take part in sexual acts, including with other people, or forcing sex after physical assaults, sexually degrading language, rape, forcing the victim to have sex or commit a sexual act against their will, unwanted sexual contact and demands, forced involvement into making or watching pornography, deliberately being hurt during sex, or being pressurized or being tricked into having unsafe sex. Emotional abuse and coercive control. This is an act or a pattern of acts used to harm, punish, or frighten their victim. This is about how the victim is made to feel. It includes a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and/or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for independence, resistance, and escape, and regulating their everyday behaviour. It has been a criminal offence since 2015, and some examples of it are on the next slide. Repeatedly putting a person down, calling them names or telling them they're worthless, threats to kill the victim or kill their children, expression of thoughts to end their own life or harm themselves if the victim wishes to end the relationship, threats to publish information about them or report to the police or local authority, damage to property or household goods, forcing a person to take part in criminal activity or child abuse, controlling how much money a person has and how they spend it, monitoring their activities and every move. Psychological abuse. This is when someone is subjected to or exposed to a situation that can result in psychological trauma, including anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. This could be a reason why we may be seeing people who are using our services. Also known as headworking or gaslighting. Gaslighting is a term that refers to trying to convince someone they're wrong about something even when they aren't. It makes someone question their sanity, perception of reality, or memories. People experiencing gaslighting often feel confused, anxious, and unable to trust themselves. This is about how someone makes you think, as opposed to emotional abuse, which is how someone makes you feel. Harassment and stalking. Stalking is a pattern of persistent and unwanted attention that makes you feel pestered, scared, anxious, or harassed. Some examples of stalking are regularly giving unwanted gifts, making unwanted communication, damaging property, repeatedly following you or spying on you, or threats. Taken in isolation, some of the behaviours may seem like small acts, but together they make up a consistent pattern of behaviour that is frightening and upsetting. And it's important to know that stalking is a criminal offence. Economic and financial abuse. So this is when one partner is controlling the financial independence and freedom of the other partner, taking wages, preventing work, gambling family assets, having all bank accounts in the abuser's name, controlling how, when and where money is spent, assigning an allowance, often very small or unrealistic in relation to the cost of living, denying a partner the right to work outside the home or make any financial contribution to the family. It could be misusing a partner's name for financial reasons, forcing a partner to sign documents against their will, such as taxes, immigration papers, or other important documents, or being forced to run up debt in their name. Digital and online abuse. Many relationships that begin romantically can quickly become controlling, with partners reading emails, checking texts, and locations of social media posts. Another example is the sharing of intimate photographs or videos without a person's consent, or using tracking and spyware to monitor a person's whereabouts and activity. Female genital mutilation, also known as cutting or female circumcision. It's the removal of external female genitalia for non-medical reasons and is illegal in the UK. Penine Care has an FGM safeguarding pathway. There's a mandatory duty to report known child cases to the police via 101 and to Children's Services. And also there's mandatory recording of cases for the Department of Health. For adult victims, we should consider the children at risk and report to Children's Services, but also consider any adult safeguarding procedures and consider if there is risk for a parent who does not want their child to go through this. Adolescent parent abuse. The key purpose of adolescence is to achieve independence. An early adolescent will bounce between childlike and adult behaviour, wanting independence one minute and support the next. Conflict is likely, and you can expect a child to shout or swear at such times. You can also expect to feel safe during these arguments. However, some children and adolescents will start to display behaviour that is very different from the healthy anger described above. These behaviours will be violent and abusive, and as a consequence make family members feel worried, upset and fearful for their safety. Currently, there is no legal definition of adolescent parent violence and abuse. However, it is increasingly recognised as a form of domestic violence and abuse, and can include many of the other types of behaviours described previously, such as damage to property, emotional abuse and economic financial abuse. Intrafamilial abuse. This is where there's abuse between adult family members, not only intimate partners. It's not always recognised as domestic abuse, which then impacts on the response. And we know that older people are particularly affected. Being able to identify domestic abuse in terms of intrafamilial abuse is really important in terms of the response that we provide. Very often the response from professionals is to make referral to adult safeguarding. But the risk here is that if the criteria for Section 42 inquiry under the Care Act is not met, this can leave victims without support. Typically, the response to victims of domestic abuse, which has included policy, service provision and current risk assessment models, is focused on an intimate partner model. The response has been developed from research primarily based on the experiences of younger victims, mainly women and their children, experiencing abuse from male intimate partners and ex-partners. This is often known as the public story of domestic abuse. So when we're coming across intrafamilial abuse, it's really important that we are completing dash risk assessments as we would with other domestic abuse that we're coming across, and consider if there's a need to use professional judgment to make referral to MARAC if the score is less than 14. And in terms of the risk to older people, the prevalence of adult family violence towards victims increases with age. 44% of victims aged over 60 years will experience abuse from adult family members, as compared to 6% of victims aged under 60 years. So-called honour-based violence and abuse. These are a collection of practices used to control a person's behaviour within families and communities in order to protect perceived cultural and religious beliefs and/or honour. The use of abuse and violence can be used when perpetrators perceive a person has brought shame or embarrassment to the family and/or community and breaking honour codes. Although girls and women are most often the victims of so-called honour-based violence and abuse, it's important to note boys and men can also be affected. Victims may find it hard to understand what so-called honour-based violence and abuse is, as the practices are embedded within their upbringing and culture. But we should remember that it's not part of any religion and look at the crime, not the culture. It's important practitioners are able to understand and recognise signs, symptoms and motivations. The one chance rule is a reference to remembering there may only be one chance to speak to a potential victim, and thus there may only be one chance to save a life. When working with victims, it's important to establish secure and confidential contact at the earliest opportunity, as you may not have another chance to get information or to see the person again. We should never try to mediate with family and/or community. And in terms of practitioner responsibilities, you need to make sure you're discussing this with your manager, contact us in the safeguarding team, refer to MASH, IDFA team, specialist IDFA teams. You can contact Karma Nirvana, which is an excellent organisation, very experienced in dealing with forced marriage and so-called honour-based violence and abuse. And if there's an acute immediate risk, you need to be contacting police on 999, or if it's not non-emergent, 101. Signs of domestic abuse. All relationships are different. There isn't such a thing as a normal relationship, but there are healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. Some obvious signs of physical abuse could include bruises, cuts, loss of hair or broken bones. We might notice that somebody is making excuses for having frequent injuries. We might notice emotional signs such as depression or somebody being more withdrawn. They might be very quiet, or they might be very jumpy and nervous. They might notice that somebody's missing appointments either with ourselves or with other professionals. Perhaps they're being absent from work or social occasions. Maybe their partner is always with them. And if we're visiting them at home, we might notice that there's lots of broken items or damage to the property. And we might also notice that there's a lack of independent means of communication or a lack of money. Now we're going to look at legislation relating to domestic abuse. Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, or DVDS, often called Clare's Law after the landmark case that led to it. It's important to remember that it's for anyone in an intimate relationship, regardless of gender. The DVDS gives members of the public a formal mechanism to make inquiries about an individual who they are in a relationship with, or who is in a relationship with someone they know, where there is concern that the individual may be violent towards their partner. Members of the public can make an application for a disclosure, known as the right to ask. Anyone can make an inquiry, but information will only be given to someone at risk or a person in a position to safeguard the victim. As a trust, we can also request disclosure is made of an offender's past history where it's believed someone is at risk of harm. This is known as the right to know. If a potentially violent individual is identified as having convictions for violent offences, or information is held about their behaviour which reasonably leads the police and other agencies to believe they pose a risk of harm to their partner, the police will consider disclosing the information. A disclosure can be made if it's legal, proportionate and necessary to do so. And the link to make an application to Greater Manchester Police is included in the training guide accompanying this presentation. Stalking Protection Act 2019. While no definition of stalking is within the legislation, the police and CPS have adopted the following description: a pattern of unwanted, fixated and obsessive behaviour which is intrusive. It can include harassment that amounts to stalking or stalking that causes fear of violence or serious alarm or distress. It's a range of behaviours and not all criminal in isolation. If the behaviour is persistent and clearly unwanted, causing fear, distress or anxiety, then it is stalking. This Act has been created to enable early police intervention to address stalking behaviours before they become entrenched or escalate in severity and to protect victims from more serious harm. Application for a stalking protection order is made by police to the magistrates' court, and there are a number of agencies and charities that provide support to victims of stalking, 2 examples being the Susie Lamplugh Trust and Paladin. Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. We've already made some references to this already in the presentation, but here is a summary of some of the key provisions. A legal definition of domestic abuse which recognises children as victims in their own right. A legal duty on councils to fund support for survivors in safe accommodation and priority need for victims who are homeless. New protections in the family and civil courts for survivors. New criminal offences including post-separation coercive control, non-fatal strangulation, threats to disclose private sexual images, and also a ban on abusers using a defence of rough sex. Domestic abuse is a category of abuse named in the Care Act of 2014, so there's need to consider if the adult safeguarding duty is triggered. Everyone is vulnerable at times, but not all adults have care and support needs, and these are the ones that are entitled to be safeguarded under the Care Act. The criteria for this safeguarding duty is for when an adult has care and support needs and is experiencing or at risk of abuse and or neglect and is unable to keep themselves safe. Practitioners' roles and responsibilities. In all circumstances, document decision making, actions taken to manage risk and rationale for sharing or not sharing information. Put an alert on Paris. Record the identity of the alleged perpetrator, particularly relevant where we've had repeat victims who've had different abusive partners. Complete a dash. Refer to Safe Lives guidance and the MARAC referral criteria. Consult with other partners to clarify their roles and responsibilities. Share information and seek advice, e.g. police, health, housing, domestic abuse or domestic violence specialists. Follow up on any referrals made. And when signposting to other agencies, always consider risks associated with the perpetrator finding leaflets and letters, etc. And complete some safety planning with the victim. Completing a dash. It's good practice to complete a dash with anyone disclosing domestic abuse, as it's an opportunity to have a conversation about risk. The dash is an assessment based on actuarial data involving the use of risk indicators to assess the probability of serious harm or homicide. For domestic abuse cases, the number of yes answers on the dash usually determines the level of risk, and the recommendation is that 14 yes answers on the dash should result in a referral to MARAC. However, completing a dash is not a simple tick box exercise, and even where there's lower numbers of ticks, professional judgment should be used to inform the overall assessment of risk. In addition, professional judgment should not be used to downgrade an actuarial risk assessment. We should consider who's best placed to complete a dash, as some questions are very personal and it can be a very difficult experience for the person who's being asked the questions. Professional judgment involves an assessment of dangerousness based on an individual practitioner's consideration of a situation, but will naturally use the information from the DASH checklist to inform this judgment. Referrals to MARAC can be made based solely on professional judgment. However, it is the practitioner's responsibility to articulate what their concerns are and the reasons for the referral. The potential for escalation can be assessed by looking at the frequency and or severity of abuse. It's common practice for services to determine there is a potential for serious harm or homicide when 3 domestic abuse events have been identified in a 12-month period. For For example, 3 attendances at A&E or 3 police call-outs, etc. This should alert professionals to the need to consider a referral to MARAC. A repeat MARAC referral refers to any instance of abuse between the same victim and perpetrator within the 12 months since the last referral to MARAC. The individual act of abuse does not need to be criminal, violent or threatening, but should be viewed within the context of a pattern of coercive and controlling behaviour. It could include unwanted direct or indirect contact from the perpetrator and or their family or friends, a breach of police or court bail conditions, any dispute between the victim and perpetrator, including over child contact, property, divorce, separation proceedings, etc. The domestic homicide timeline. When we talk about high-risk domestic abuse, we are talking about the potential risk of a victim being murdered. Often domestic homicide cases have been presented in the media and elsewhere as incidents that have come out of the blue, where a perpetrator has lost control. Research has found that this is not the case. In research published in 2018, Dr. Monckton Smith reviewed domestic violence killings in the UK, which showed an 8-stage timeline of events before a homicide takes place. Stages identified are a useful tool that can be used alongside the wealth of research in domestic abuse risk assessment to provide an early warning about cases that require more resources and specialised expertise. The research is also really helpful in combating common myths about domestic abuse that are held by the general public, including that a woman should just leave and then she will be safe. It's not always the case that leaving an abusive partner will increase a victim's safety, and research has established that in many cases, domestic abuse from an intimate partner does not end upon separation. Post-separation can actually see an escalation of abuse, with women reporting continued threats and intimidation when leaving their abusive partner, as well as an increased risk of homicide. The Femicide Census of 2018 identified that 41% of women killed by a partner or former partner had separated or taken steps to separate, with 30% killed within the first month and 70% killed within the first year of separation. Another myth is that domestic homicide happens because the man loses control. We can see from the timeline that controlling and coercive behaviour underpins the vast majority of domestic homicides. Rather than a loss of control, the perpetrator is very much in control. Another myth is that if there is no physical violence, that it can't be that bad. The 8-step timeline highlights the importance of considering all types of abuse rather than just physical violence. Whilst a history of physical violence in a relationship is a strong predictor of future assaults, individual acts of violence rarely occur in isolation and are more usually part of a pattern of ongoing abusive and aggressive behaviour. As demonstrated in the 8 stages, it's important to take into account the full range of violence and abuse, including controlling behaviour and harassment. So the 8 steps are: number 1, a pre-relationship history of stalking or abuse by the perpetrator. And this is where a referral to the DVDS scheme can be really, really helpful. Step 2, the romance develops quickly into a serious relationship. Step 3, the relationship becomes dominated by coercive control. Step 4, a trigger threatens the perpetrator's control. For example, the relationship ends or the perpetrator gets into financial difficulty. Step 5, escalation, an increase in the intensity or frequency of the partner's control tactics, such as stalking or threatening suicide. Step 6, the perpetrator has a change in thinking, choosing to move on either through revenge or by homicide. Step 7, planning. The perpetrator might buy weapons or seek opportunities to get the victim alone. And step 8 is homicide. The perpetrator kills his or her partner and possibly hurts others, such as the victim's children. The Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, or MARAC as it's commonly known, This is a multi-agency information sharing meeting. It's chaired by the police. It's for those victims who've been identified by local partner agencies as being high-risk victims of domestic abuse. And it works on the basis that the initial safeguarding has already taken place and that all agencies that need to be involved already are. It's an opportunity for all agencies to share information which might identify further risks to the victim and develop a multi-agency action plan to address any outstanding risks with timescales and leads for all partners to be aware of the activity. So the referral process into MARAC is via the dash form that we've already discussed. Slightly variable across all 5 boroughs covered by Pennine Care, but now we have MARAC reps in post or in the process of being recruited, and so they can support these referrals into the MARAC process. This link to the Greater Manchester Safeguarding Children's Board Procedures Online is a really excellent resource, and as ever you can always contact the Pennine Care Safeguarding team to discuss any concerns or to seek advice about making referrals into MARAC. Safety planning. Sitting with a victim and talking to them about how they can maintain their safety is really important. An IDVA, which is an independent domestic violence advocate or other specialist worker, can support this too. Think about the layout of the house and what areas are places of safety or present greater risk. Consider what target hardening could be put in place. The fire service can assess and install smoke alarms and letterbox guards if there's been threats of arson, but it might be possible that other forms of security can be enhanced as well. By talking to landlord or housing provider or victim support, just seeking out that advice and guidance. Confiding in a trusted friend or family member, accessing support and a place of safety if you need to leave, arranging passwords or codes to ensure it's safe to talk or to alert people that you're at significant risk of harm. There are some downloadable apps that are really helpful, such as Holly Gizzard. And it's also possible to get domestic abuse protection orders. And in the reference sheet at the end, and also within the training guide, there is information about the National Centre for Domestic Violence. It's important to be aware of the potential of someone being under surveillance. Is the phone on when they're at appointments? Are they being tracked? Is it possible they could have a bag packed ready and if possible leave at a trusted friend's or family home? This should include medical essentials, important documents including passports, driving licence, etc. Maybe the service they're in touch with could keep copies of these documents. Is it possible that they could have a separate mobile phone and money hidden away? Teach children how to ring 999 and ask for help. And advise of increased risks at the point of ending a relationship. The Alice Ruggles Trust exists to raise awareness of stalking. Watch their 3-minute long video featuring 2 friends discussing the behaviour of an ex-partner. This is duly recognised as stalking, safety advice is given, and the victim is supported in making a police report. The aim of the video is to raise awareness of seemingly low-risk behaviours and encouraging people to seek help.
Thanks for meeting me here. It's been such a long time.
I know, I've hardly seen you.
Yeah, not again.
What's wrong?
It's another text from my ex. He won't stop pestering me.
Oh, that's not cool.
Yeah, it's no big deal, of course. I'm fine.
You look a bit pale, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just that it makes me feel really nervous for some reason. Like my mouth gets all dry and I feel sort of shaky. At least he doesn't know where I live.
I'm so sorry. Wait, is that why you moved?
No, not really. I was having a hard time feeling relaxed at my old flat.
Did he come round to your flat after you broke up?
He just seems to pop up everywhere. Even though he doesn't live near here, he still texts me all the time. I told him not to contact me, but it doesn't help. I think he's just really upset about the breakup, you know?
That's not just being upset. That's stalking, like real stalking, you know? When someone becomes fixated or obsessed with another person and keeps intruding on their life and making them fearful and anxious. This is serious.
You think so? I don't want to overreact. I'm just trying to ignore it.
You don't need to worry about overreacting. Stalking doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's showing up where you are, sometimes it's bombarding you with texts or memes, trolling you or hacking your phone or social media. If you ignore it, it might escalate in intensity, frequency, or even into violence.
Okay. Well, now I am worried. But what can I do about it?
Okay, first, contact the police if you feel comfortable doing that. Stalking is a crime and you have the right to be safe. If you don't feel comfortable contacting the police, talk to someone you trust, like a parent or neighbour. You can also contact the National Stalking Helpline. Then definitely keep a record of everything, screenshots, call logs, and keep a diary. Time, dates, locations of incidents, any witnesses, and include how you felt at the time in any entries. Change the passwords to your accounts and think about muting rather than blocking on social media. I'd say do what you can to avoid contact and vary your routine wherever possible.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I should report it. I'm not sure what I did wrong that led to this.
If someone won't accept your no, that is not your fault. You have the right to be safe and free from stalking. We all need support sometimes, and I'm here for you. Do you want me to come with you to make the report?
That would be great. Thanks for being such a good friend.
Children who are exposed to violence in the home are denied their right to a safe and stable home environment. 1 in 7, or 14.2% children and young people under the age of 18 will have lived with domestic violence at some point in their childhood. And the impact can be devastating and long-lasting. There can be an increased risk to children of both physical and emotional abuse. Children's responses to the trauma of witnessing domestic abuse may vary according to a multitude of factors, including but not limited to age, race, sex, and stage of development. They have limited opportunity and capacity to escape and/or manage the domestic abuse. It's equally important to remember these responses may also be caused by something other than witnessing domestic abuse. Risk to an unborn child could include low birth weight and miscarriage. Delayed development, including brain development, physical development, and language development, can also be an issue. This could include sleep disturbance, which can affect their ability to concentrate and learn. Long-term psychological harm can include anxiety, low mood, and hypervigilance, which is a state of increased alertness. If you're in a state of hypervigilance, you're extremely sensitive to your surroundings. It can make you feel like you're alert to any hidden dangers, whether from other people or the environment, often though these dangers are not real. Some children may become a carer for their parent or siblings, which can make them feel worried, resentful, or stigmatized. Who does domestic abuse affect? The Crime Survey for England and Wales estimated that 5% of adults, 6.9% women and 3% men aged 16 and over experienced domestic abuse in the year ending March 2022. This equates to an estimated 2.4 million adults, 1.7 million women, and 699,000 men. Children are victims in their own right if exposed to domestic abuse. And there is a specific trust policy relating to staff members who are victims of domestic abuse. This is currently being reviewed, so there will be a new policy soon. Barriers to seeking support. There are many barriers for someone seeking support. They may not recognise that they're a victim of abuse or believe that it's serious enough. Domestic abuse is often assumed to be a problem of heterosexual relationships, and or that it is primarily a problem of physical violence, with the abuse perpetrated by the bigger, stronger heterosexual man against the smaller, weaker heterosexual woman. This public story can affect a person's decision to seek help, as they're less likely to label themselves as experiencing abuse if unable to identify with the characteristics of domestic abuse that this perception presents. Fear can be an issue, what the abuser may do to them and or their friends and family, including their children. In the LGBTQ community, there could be a fear of being outed or a fear of homophobia within services. And male victims may have a fear of not being believed or being seen as weak. Cultural beliefs can be factors. They may be abused by someone who says the form of abuse is justified due to cultural beliefs. It could be a lack of support from within their own community. For older people, there may be a generational acceptance of abuse, as in this is just how it is, marriage is for life, etc. A fear of starting over in later life could also be a factor. They might have ill health or care needs and a reliance on their abuser. Or there may be that there's a belief that support is only aimed at younger people. There could be an assumption that women are not violent, or that violence taking place between two women or two men is less serious than in heterosexual relationships, or is likely to be mutual abuse. These myths could result in misunderstanding or minimizing the risk experienced by LGBTQ victims. Financial issues can be a barrier. What if they are financially dependent on their abuser and don't know what they may be entitled to in their own name, such as housing, benefits, etc.? There could be immigration or visa issues, which leads to no recourse to public funds. And emotional factors. Victims can face emotional barriers, low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, guilt, embarrassment and shame as a result of the abuse. It could be there's a reluctance to let go of the dream of happily ever after, and believing that the abusive behaviour isn't really who the abuser is, hoping that the abuser will change, and feeling commitment and love during the honeymoon periods that may occur in between abusive events. Barriers for professionals. It can be difficult to know that there's domestic abuse happening or assess risk if there's no noticeable injury or bruising, but we should consider the injury that isn't immediately visible. It could be clothing or makeups hiding bruises. So if someone's got long sleeves on a really hot day, we might be professionally curious about that. And also to keep in mind that injury can take time to manifest. For example, in cases of non-fatal strangulation, there may be damage caused to the veins that can increase risk of stroke. So if someone's disclosing that this has happened to them, and we're thinking, well, it's not that bad because there's no bruising, we need to think about that potential for serious harm that isn't immediately obvious. And we also need to think about harm caused by threat of violence, emotional abuse, coercion, and control. It can be really difficult and challenging to assess risk and what's happening in a person's life if they've retracted an allegation or disclosure. It doesn't necessarily mean that abuse is not happening. An effort should be made to understand what's happening in the context of the victim and the alleged perpetrator. Fear could be a reason for retraction, or a promise made that it will never happen again. In the context of a patient who is acutely mentally unwell or may have a learning disability, if there are allegations made, how is this information interpreted and what actions followed? If we assume it's part of a mental health presentation, then it may mean that essential safeguarding work is not undertaken. And mental capacity should always be considered and assessed within this, taking into account also executive capacity, and then using all the relevant frameworks and legal protections through the Court of Protection, considering inherent jurisdiction, etc. Seeking that specialist legal advice is really important. And also using a trauma-informed approach is essential. We know that our own life experiences may influence our attitudes and beliefs about victims and perpetrators of domestic abuse, and therefore may influence how we support victims and perpetrators. There is a section in the training guide that allows you to reflect on the short video you're about to see. The couple in the video are actors, but the rest of the people in the park are the general public. There's some colourful language in the video, so please be mindful if there's anyone in earshot who this may not be appropriate to hear or may offend. If you will be offended, please turn down the volume until the video has finished. Watch the two scenarios and make a note of how the people around respond. What do you see? Think about how you may have responded and the reasons why. This video is 1 minute and 50 seconds. What to do if you're concerned or someone tells you they're a victim of domestic abuse. There are far too many missed opportunities to get help for families experiencing domestic abuse. Safe Life data shows we know that 85% of victims sought help 5 times on average in the year before they got effective help to stop the abuse. Each contact represents a chance for us to help the victim disclose and get help. A chance that was missed leaves the family to live with the abuse for longer. We have to get it right first time for every family living with domestic abuse. Consider safety and find a safe way to talk. Have the conversation in a safe and private place. Always be aware of the risk and do not have any conversations in front of the abuser or over the phone if the abuser is likely to be present. Check if it is safe to speak. If you have concerns and can't find any safe way to talk with your person, raise this with your line manager or our safeguarding team to discuss ways to make contact safely. If you're working in clinical services, you should be routinely inquiring about domestic abuse with all people who use our services. Be non-judgmental. Do not make comments about the abuser or offer your opinion or personal experience. Just listen to them and believe what they're saying. Let the person tell their story. Tell them it's not their fault. Continue to think about the risks to the person, yourself, and to any children, remembering that safeguarding is everyone's business. Where there are children involved, you will need to complete a referral to Children's Services, who can assess the risk of the children experiencing significant harm and support families. Contact our safeguarding team for advice, support and guidance. If there's an immediate risk, call 999 for the police. Offer support if it is safe to do so. You can explain there is support available and you can help them access that support. Check what the person wants and feel safe in doing. Record what's been said and what actions have been taken and what you intend to do. For people who use our services, this should be within their records, and for people who work for us, this should be recorded in their personal file. Do something. If you have concerns about domestic abuse and or children, or someone makes a disclosure to you, or something just doesn't feel right, act on it. Speak to somebody, report it, don't ignore it. Consider safeguarding processes for children and adults. And what other processes will support victims? Consider high-risk protocols, team around adult. Consider if there's a need for a safeguarding referral to the local authority, but also think about if there's a need for further assessment of their care and support needs. Find out what the local provision is in the borough where you work and live. Each area has its own arrangements for independent domestic violence advocates and domestic abuse services, but they should be easy to find on the local authority website or the Community Safety Partnership websites. Risk. Just to review, risk is one of the most important things we need to consider when we have concerns or someone's made disclosure to us. Increased risk at separation is something we need to be aware of. The risk of serious harm and homicide increases at the time of separation. And leaving a relationship doesn't mean the abuse stops. In fact, sometimes it can increase and get worse at this time. It's very important if someone's planning to leave a relationship, they do it as safely as possible, and if possible with the support of a specialist domestic abuse agency. If disclosure is made to you, then please use the DASH risk assessment. Anyone can use this tool, and the purpose of the DASH is to give a consistent and simple tool in order to help you identify those who are at high risk of harm. When completing a dash, this gives you a score and helps you to decide if the victim should be referred to MARAC. There's further training on completing dash risk assessments and MARAC you can complete, or you can contact our safeguarding team. A copy of the dash risk assessment and how to refer to MARAC can be found on the safeguarding page on the intranet. The link for this is in your training guide. We need to think about the risk to the victim and how aware they are of the risks. Also the risk to any children involved in the family, and to remember our safeguarding duties to report any concerns we have to the local children's services. Our safeguarding team can offer advice, support and guidance for all staff to ensure we keep children and adults safe. We also need to consider the risk to ourselves and report any concerns for our own safety to our line manager. Local and national resources. There are many local and national resources available for people affected by domestic abuse. Section 11 of your training guide will provide further information about organisations that can help adults experiencing domestic abuse. These include the criminal justice system, with police powers enabling them to support victims and manage abusers. Domestic Violence Protection Orders, or DVPOs, were implemented across England and Wales in March 2014. They provide protection to victims by enabling the police and magistrates to put in place protection in the immediate aftermath of a domestic violence incident. With DVPOs, a perpetrator can be banned with immediate effect from returning to a residence and from having a contact with the victim for up to 28 days, allowing the victim time to consider their options and get the support they need. The training guide also includes support services to support victims, which includes helplines, including a 24-hour national domestic abuse helpline. There is online support, including web chats and forums. There is also support for children, such as specialist websites and helplines that children can contact if they are concerned. Additionally, there is support for abusers and people concerned about their own behaviours, which includes a national helpline and web chats. Within the Trust, we have a domestic violence and abuse policy, support for managers and staff, which ensures that all staff are aware of their individual duties to colleagues who may be experiencing domestic abuse or a perpetrator of domestic abuse. It also provides guidance to managers and colleagues who may suspect or be aware of such abuse. Our staff can also access staff wellbeing services, which are available on the Trust intranet site. We've come to the end of the video. So to recap, here's what we've covered. We've talked about how to recognise domestic abuse and who it can affect. We've discussed what to do if you have a concern or someone makes a disclosure, and we've talked about risks associated with domestic abuse and safety planning. We've talked about local and national support available and how to apply to the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme. For further training, look out for lunch and learn sessions delivered by our safeguarding team and briefings that we produce as well. There's also some previous sessions that are available as recordings on the safeguarding team page on the intranet. For local safeguarding partnership training, this is available on the safeguarding page of our intranet, and details are also included in your training guide. Also look out for our quarterly safeguarding newsletter. For further safeguarding support, please contact our duty worker who's available for advice, support and guidance Monday to Friday, 9 AM till 4:30 PM. You can contact us on 0161 716 3785 or email pcn-tr.safeguarding@nhs.net. And please provide an NHS number if seeking advice via email. Thank you for listening.